The crystal stemware in my hand suddenly felt cold as ice as my sister's words crashed into me like a physical blow. "Julia, find another table," Fiona said, her voice dripping with honey-coated venom. "This dinner is for real family only." The entire restaurant seemed to freeze around me. Conversations at neighboring tables stuttered to a halt as heads turned in our direction. My heartbeat thundered in my ears so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. The fork in my other hand clattered against fine china as my fingers lost their strength. Fiona's smile never faltered as she gestured toward a small table near the service station. The others, Uncle Peter, Aunt Greta, and my cousin William, exchanged glances that mixed amusement with discomfort, but not one of them spoke up. 20 years of subtle exclusion had finally crystallized into this public rejection. I rose on legs that threatened to buckle, my dress suddenly feeling too tight across my chest as I struggled to breathe normally. The distance to the other table might as well have been miles. Each step felt like walking through quicksand while dozens of eyes tracked my humiliation. When the waiter approached later with the leather-bound folder, I already knew what waited inside. The bill for $3,500, wines selected from the reserve list, 4 courses of the most expensive items, desserts I hadn't even been offered. Fiona's eyes gleamed with triumph across the room as I slid my credit card into the folder. "Consider it a little thank you," she called, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "for all the years we kept you under our roof." As I signed the receipt, something hardened inside me. I rose, keeping my back straight despite the crushing weight on my shoulders. But behind my carefully composed face, a decision had been made. They would never again determine my worth. "My name is Julia, I'm 34 and a financial analyst. This is the story of how I reclaimed my family legacy after decades of being erased." I'd grown up with constant reminders that I didn't truly belong. When William turned 16, the driveway gleamed with his new sports car while I walked miles to school in shoes that let the rain in. Fiona received designer dresses in tissue paper while I wore hand-me-downs that smelled of storage and neglect. My questions about college were answered with sharp reminders to be grateful you have a roof at all. If it hadn't been for Aunt Regina, I might have believed their version of reality. She was the only one who truly saw me, the only family member who attended my college graduation, pressing a leather-bound journal into my hands. "You don't need anyone to grant you worth, Julia," she'd whispered. "You'll build it yourself." Regina rarely interfered with the family's treatment of me, but her observant eyes missed nothing. Her attentive gaze was often the only confirmation that I wasn't imagining the slights and exclusions. That night at the restaurant, I had planned to slip away unnoticed after paying the humiliating bill. My public rejection felt complete, and I wanted only to escape. But then came the unexpected sound of Regina's chair scraping against hardwood. She stood, both hands planted firmly on the white tablecloth, her voice filling every corner of the suddenly silent dining room. "I won't sit by and watch you tear Julia down another second." Conversation died instantly. Forks paused midair. Glasses froze halfway to lips. My chest tightened as Regina reached into her handbag and withdrew a thick envelope bearing an official seal. "I signed a new will yesterday," she announced, her voice steady and resolute. "Every property, every company, every investment, everything belongs to Julia. None of you will inherit a penny." Her words landed like lightning. William's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. Fiona's jaw dropped, her face twisting in disbelief. Peter and Greta's expressions drained of color simultaneously. My pulse roared in my ears as if my body couldn't process such a dramatic shift in fortune. In that moment, the elegant restaurant transformed from a place of my humiliation into the stage for my vindication. I was no longer pushed to the margins. I had become the center, the focal point of a storm that had been brewing for decades. The announcement spread through our social circles with shocking speed. Within days, my phone was flooded with messages. William's texts arrived first, thinly veiled threats that quickly morphed into accusations. Fiona's followed, dripping with outrage barely disguising panic. Then came William's voice one evening, sharp and cold through my phone. "Julia, this charade won't stand. We are taking you to court. Haven't you embarrassed us enough? Now you want to rob us too?" I sat alone in my downtown apartment, street lights casting striped shadows across my walls. His words stung, though not because they surprised me. I had always been the family scapegoat. But now I was suddenly cast as the villain, the thief. Tabloids amplified the narrative. Magazine covers screamed adopted daughter snatches fortune and angel or gold digger. Paparazzi snapped photos of me at mundane moments, grocery shopping, leaving my office building, each image weaponized to support whatever story they wanted to tell. Online, strangers dissected my life with disturbing enthusiasm, their comments forming a chorus of uninformed judgment. The first real blow landed when I discovered William had hired a private investigator to scrutinize every aspect of my past. A former colleague who worked at the same firm had called to warn me after overhearing the PI discussing my case with William in a coffee shop. The second blow followed quickly, Fiona sobbing on national television, insisting to millions of viewers that I had manipulated Regina's fragile mental state. The host nodded with practiced gravity while the audience murmured sympathetically. Watching from my living room, I felt like I was trapped in someone else's script, cast as the villain in a story I never wrote. Then came the turning point I never anticipated. One late afternoon, Regina summoned me to her study in the Lakeshore mansion. Papers lay spread across her mahogany desk, heavy with official stamps and signatures. She slid a folder toward me, her expression somber. "Julia," she said quietly, "you need to see this. Peter and Greta didn't just mistreat you. They stole from you $600,000 your parents left specifically for your care and education. They spent every penny of it." I flipped through the statements, my chest tightening with each line. Tuition for William's private school, airfare for Fiona's European vacations, renovations to the family home, all drawn from funds meant for me. For years, I had wondered if I was simply ungrateful, if perhaps my wounds were imagined or exaggerated. But staring at these figures, I finally knew the truth. I hadn't just been denied affection. I had been robbed the moment my parents died. After reviewing the documents late into the evening, I returned to my apartment, unable to sleep with the weight of this revelation. The next morning, I drove back to Regina's estate at her request. Sitting beside Regina on her sunlit terrace, I noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. Her voice seemed thinner than before. I asked the question that had weighed on me all night. "How long have you known?" Her sigh carried the weight of years. 2. I had my lawyer investigate quietly. I couldn't accuse without proof. She met my eyes directly. "Julia, this was never about money alone. It was about how they used you, how they built their lives on what was rightfully yours. I refused to leave this world with that lie still standing." Her gaze held mine, unwavering despite the shadows beneath her eyes. "The doctors say it's stage 4 pancreatic. My time is short, but before I go, I want justice for you." Her words cut deeper than any insult William or Fiona had ever hurled. The relief of knowing she had always seen the truth collided with the grief of realizing I would lose her soon. She reached for my hand, her grip frail but determined. "We'll do this together." A press conference, all the documents, all the evidence laid bare for everyone to see. "You will not be silenced anymore." I looked at her, physically diminished yet uncompromising in spirit, and felt something ignite within me. For the first time in decades, hope rose above the familiar ache. This time, the world would hear my voice. This time, justice wouldn't be theirs to manipulate. The morning of the press conference brought a light rain that felt oddly appropriate, small, cold drops against my coat. As Regina and I entered the packed room, camera flashes erupted like hostile stars. Microphones stretched toward us as if trying to extract the truth before we could speak it. I sat beside Regina, my fingers gripping the armrest, watching as our attorney, Mr. Donovan, arranged documents where cameras couldn't miss them: bank statements, notarized transfers, medical evaluations proving Regina's mental acuity. When Regina spoke, her voice carried a steadiness I struggled to maintain within myself. She methodically detailed the small cruelties that had defined my childhood, then pushed the financial records forward and stated plainly that money designated for my upbringing had been systematically diverted. The room fell silent. For once, private injuries had become public record. Then Fiona burst through the doorway, mascara streaming down her cheeks, outrage evident in every gesture. She pointed directly at me, her accusations loud and performative. Cameras eagerly captured her every tremor and tear. Instead of shrinking from the spectacle, Regina leaned close and whispered, "See? They undo themselves." The words felt like a match struck in darkness. I sat perfectly still as the world witnessed the wound finally exposing its raw truth. Video of Fiona's outburst went viral within hours. Social media exploded with people who had never met me suddenly expressing either outrage or support, while others dug for additional dirt. 3 days later, the family's attorneys filed a lawsuit accusing me of coercion and undue influence. The narrative flipped again, the defender becoming the accused. Rumors began circulating, alleged improprieties with clients, anonymous tips to reporters, venomous headlines, each a calculated blow. One night, a man's voice left a message warning me to walk away or be exposed. My hands trembled not from fear alone, but from fury I'd suppressed for too long. Mr. Donovan spread our evidence across Regina's coffee table, speaking with the directness of someone accustomed to legal storms. They'll manufacture noise. We answer with facts. Watching Regina rest, her breathing shallow but her determination unchanged, I understood what we were truly fighting for. Not money, but the truth about who I had always been. This time I would not be silenced. The courthouse gleamed in the morning sunlight, but inside the courtroom, tension hung so heavy it seemed to distort the air itself. I wheeled Regina to our table, Mr. Donovan walking beside us with quiet confidence that steadied my nerves. Across the aisle sat Peter, Greta, William, and Fiona, their suits immaculate, their expressions hardened into masks of righteous indignation. Their attorney rose first, his voice smooth yet cutting. He painted me as a manipulator who had preyed on an elderly woman's vulnerability. She exploited Mrs. Reynolds's weakened state, bending her judgment to steal what was never hers, he declared, his gaze piercing me as if challenging me to object. Each word ignited equal measures of anger and grief because the truth was far simpler. I had never wanted their money, only acknowledgement, only justice. Mr. Donovan stood with measured confidence. He methodically presented our evidence, bank records tracing the theft of $600,000, withdrawn and redirected to cover William's private education, Fiona's European travels, Peter and Greta's renovations. Witnesses testified to years of systematic exclusion and the calculated humiliations I had endured. Then came the medical records, undeniable proof of Regina's mental clarity when she signed her will. But it was the video evidence that transformed the atmosphere of the courtroom. On screen, Fiona shrieked at reporters, her voice echoing through the speakers, "We deserve that money. We raised her." The words reverberated through the chamber, an inadvertent confession laid bare. I watched her face pale at her own recorded image, her lips trembling with the realization of what she had revealed. I rose slowly, my voice initially fragile but gaining strength with each word. "I am not here to steal. For 30 years, I have been invisible in the only home I knew. Pushed from family photos, mocked in hand-me-downs, denied even basic educational support. All while what my parents left specifically for me was spent on the real children. Today, I ask only this, that I be seen as someone worthy of justice." The silence that followed felt immense. I could hear my own heartbeat, but I did not waver. Judge Morland leaned forward, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light, her eyes sharp with finality. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds the will valid. The estate is awarded in full to Julia Bennett. Furthermore, Peter and Greta Bennett are ordered to repay the misappropriated $600,000 with interest, bringing the total to $1.8 million. This case is closed." Her gavel struck with a crack that sounded like both thunder and release. Across the room, Peter collapsed into his chair as if physically struck. Greta buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. William bent his head, all previous confidence drained away. Fiona leapt to her feet, her composure shattering completely. "No. This is fraud. She's nothing but a leech." Security officers moved quickly to restrain her as she continued shouting, her protests echoing down the hallway as they escorted her out. I sat motionless, tears flowing freely as I squeezed Regina's frail hand. She turned to me, her voice a whisper but sharp with pride, "You've won, my dear, and you've earned every bit of it." Her words filled the void left by their defeat. For the first time in my life, justice had not only spoken, it had spoken my name. The verdict rippled outward like a shockwave. Soon the city buzzed with the story. Newspaper stands displayed my photograph on front pages with headlines declaring "Adopted daughter wins justice over wealthy family." The image wasn't of a burden or an opportunist, but of a woman standing with quiet dignity, someone who had finally spoken and been heard. Television news replayed courtroom footage, including the damning moment when Fiona's own words revealed the family's true perspective. For the first time in my life, the public wasn't dismissing me, they were listening. When a local news station requested an interview, I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety. Cameras had always been used to distort my story, to cut my life into fragments that fit their predetermined narratives. But this time, I knew the story would come directly from me. Under the studio lights, facing the interviewer, I spoke plainly. The hardest part wasn't about inheritance. It was living under a roof where I was never treated as family. Every day, I was reminded that I was an outsider. This ruling doesn't just return stolen money, it restores dignity. Not just for me, but for every child who has been told they are less because they were adopted. The studio fell into a silence that vibrated with tension, the kind that happens when people collectively hold their breath. Then applause broke out, swelling like a wave and spreading into homes through the broadcast. In the weeks that followed, letters and messages arrived from across the country: adopted children, foster children, people who had lived for years in the shadows of real families. Their words echoed the same sentiment: "Thank you for saying what we could not." I walked out of that interview with my shoulders lighter than they had ever been. A weight I'd carried for decades had finally lifted, not because the past had changed, but because I had claimed it for what it truly was and refused to remain silent any longer. The following weeks blurred into signatures, legal filings, and continuing media coverage. But beneath the public storm, a private reality persisted: Regina was fading. Her steps grew slower, her breathing more labored, her body more fragile with each passing day. I spent hours at her bedside, the air filled with the scent of lavender from sachets she kept near her pillows. She slept often, but when her eyes opened, they still held the fierce determination that had fueled her testimony in court. One evening, she reached for my hand, her fingers cool but steady. "Julia," she whispered, her voice thin but unwavering. "Never let them define you. You are my true legacy, not because of what I've left you, but because you found the strength to fight when they wanted you silenced." Tears slid down my cheeks as I leaned closer, inhaling the familiar scent of her silver hair against my face. I promised to carry her words always, to honor her not with wealth but with the life I would build. A few nights later, she slipped away peacefully, her face serene, her hand still loosely held in mine. The grief that tore through me was raw and overwhelming, but beneath it pulsed something stronger: the unshakable knowledge that she had left me more than material wealth. She had given me the foundation of strength and the permission to live defined not by their cruelty, but by my own resilience. 1 year later, I stood inside the glass tower of the Regina Reynolds Foundation, the charity I'd established in her honor to protect foster children who had been marginalized as I once was. On the walls hung photographs of smiling children glowing with hope and possibility. The headlines no longer labeled me as the adopted daughter chasing inheritance. Now articles described a leader, a woman who had transformed personal pain into positive change. A financial magazine even declared, "Julia Bennett, the woman who turned pain into legacy." My former family faced their own reckonings. Peter and Greta sold their properties to pay the court judgment, retreating to a small apartment in another state. William's marriage collapsed under mounting debts. Fiona's carefully constructed social standing crumbled into bankruptcy and isolation. One day, she sent an email begging for both forgiveness and financial assistance. I deleted it without hesitation. They had destroyed themselves through their own greed and entitlement. Standing on the foundation's balcony, watching the sunset wash over the city, Regina's words echoed softly in my mind: "The sweetest revenge isn't destroying them, it's building the life they never believed you deserved." And I knew with absolute certainty that I had done exactly that.